So this is an old horse that I trim. He's in his 30s now, and I think he looks pretty good for being that old. He's a sweet old man, and he has pretty nice hooves, but we keep him on a short schedule because he doesn't move as much as he used to, so he doesn't wear as much hoof wall as he used to. And I took this video while we were experiencing some really wet weather, and when it's wet, his pasture just becomes a mud pit. So there's a lot of hoof cleaning in this video prior to me trimming any of his structures. And so now I'm going to address his wall with my nippers because it's a little bit long. I'm going to take any excess material off of that area. And this horse, because he is older and he doesn't move as much, he does get some distortion in his hooves. He doesn't tend to land heel first, so his toes like to stretch forward a little bit. So usually that's the first area of his hoof I will address. But thankfully he has a good deep digital cushion in the back of his hoof. So the depth at the back of his hoof is very nice. And I just checked it there. You can see that from the area I just rasped up to the top of the heel bulbs, he probably has about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of depth. And that's really what we're always looking for, at least having that much depth in that area of the hoof. So now I'm just addressing his frog. Like I said, it's been super muddy, so I want to investigate every little nook and cranny to make sure there's no thrush in there. A lot of the horses have been developing these teeny tiny little pits in their frogs, and so I've been trying to remove those when I come across them. And then with his bars, when it's wet and muddy like this, the bars will tend to migrate forward, and they have on his hoof. So I just wanted to bring them down back to the plane of the sole so that they don't create any high spots that could lead to any damage or degeneration in the coffin bone. And once again saying that this horse, he has a long toe. So I did a little vertical nipping there to remove some of the excess length. Now I'm just smoothing those areas that I nipped a little bit more, checking the balance. Seeing that that medial heel is a little bit high, so I'm taking it down a little bit more. Well, apparently both heels are a little high. So now just smoothing that wall, taking off those rough edges, kind of creating my bevel from the bottom a little bit more. Sometimes he gets a little stiff bringing his feet forward, which is usually the opposite of what most older horses are like. So I tend to do most of my trimming from the bottom before I bring them forward, and then I'll just finish my bevel from the top. It looks pretty good. Moving on to finishing it from the top. So in Arkansas, we have a lot of mud most of the year, and one of the methods I use to remove it is what I'm doing right now. Is I will take that narrow side of my rasp, which actually has grooves in it. A rasp is a four-sided tool. So I will just very gently scrape the mud or the big pieces of mud off of the wall with that side of my rasp. But you have to be careful not to push too hard, because if you do, you'll put little grooves in the hoof wall. I've actually used that method to rough up the hoof wall when I need to. Dropping the rasp again. But other than that, just finishing my bevel, and this hoof is done. So picking out this horse's right hind, and as you can see there's a lot of dirt and debris in there, so I'm going to try to clean it out really well before I get started with my tools, because dirt and mud and rocks are the number one things that will really dull your tools if you're not careful and don't try to get the hoof as clean as possible before you start working. So you can see on this hoof I'm cleaning it out with a wire brush. And I actually didn't do that when I was working on the right front, because when I went out to catch this horse, my wire brush fell out of my chaps in his pasture. So between working on the front hoof and on this hoof, I went out there and thankfully found it pretty quickly. So right now I'm kind of looking at his frog. And one thing I've been finding in the frogs lately, with it being so wet, is that from the outside, this frog looks really healthy. But when I was taking those few swipes with my knife, I could feel a soft spot in there. So I wanted to just open it up as much as possible, because from the outside it looked healthy. But when you feel a change in texture or density in that tissue, usually that means there's like a little pocket or a void within that structure. So there was. It wasn't big, it was pretty small. I just opened it up there with my knife. So that's the best possible outcome. Sometimes you'll find really big voids and find a pocket of infection in there or evidence of an old abscess. So it's really important to be quite detail oriented this time of year when everything's so wet and muddy, because we'll find really interesting pockets within the frog sometimes when they look perfectly healthy from the exterior. So right now on this horse too, I usually take mostly material from the lateral side, the outside of his hoof wall, because the way he moves creates this kind of misshapen wear pattern on his hoof. But if I didn't trim to the sole plane, he would probably develop a sheared heel, which means one heel is much higher than the other in the soft tissue and or the hoof wall. So to keep this horse balanced, I almost trim him crooked, if that makes any sense at all. And he's not being bad. This horse is a gem of a horse. He's really wonderful to trim and to work with. He's just old and stiff, because like I said, he's in his 30s. I'm not sure exactly how old he is, but any horse in their 30s is going to have arthritis and be a little bit stiff and sore, especially through the winter months when it's cold. So like I said, focusing on that lateral side more, trimming him crooked to trim him straight. Just cleaning that off, see if I can see anything else that needs to be done. But that looks pretty good. So I think I'm going to pull it forward now.
Okay.
So once again, taking that narrow side of my rasp and very gingerly scraping off any big chunks of mud that I can. Don't worry too much about the fine stuff, because to get all the fine stuff off, I'd have to push too hard with my rasp, and I'd put grooves in the hoof wall, which on this horse I really don't want to or need to do. So just finishing my bevel, and when it's nice and smooth, I'll put this hoof down and move on to the next one. So now I'm working on this horse's left hind. And just like the other two hoofs so far, I'm going to try to pick it out really well, and then probably use my wire brush to remove any excess dirt and loose material that's on there. Just keeps my tools sharp when I don't get them full of dirt and mud and rocks and all that type of stuff. Just cleaning it out. Moving that hair mostly so I can see the soft tissue in his heel bulbs to see if one side is higher or lower than the other. Now I'm addressing his frog, and kind of want to be thorough with this frog too, because I found that pit in the back of the other one. So I want to make sure that there aren't any squishy spots and there aren't any big pits, because just you could kind of see on that lateral side of that frog, my finger's covering now, but you can kind of see it now. That was a very small pit that was in there laterally. So I opened that up with my knife, and I just like to open it up to air. I don't want to dig too deep because I don't want to create any pits myself that don't already exist. So I did that, and then I just left it alone. So now I'm taking the wall down to the plane of the sole. This horse has really nice, healthy hind hooves, so I can bring him back into balance quite easily. And as you see, he doesn't have a lot of excess of growth, because, with all horses, it's important to deal in millimeters. And ideally, most horses would be trimmed on less than a 5-week schedule. I was watching a webinar put on by Simon Curtis and Michael Savaldi, who are experts in hoof care. And they both agree that it's so important to keep these horses on a short trim schedule like this horse is on, to prevent any pathology from occurring in the first place. Because the hoof never truly heals back to a fully healthy state. Like it can heal to a fully functional state. But just like when you have surgery or something like that, you can heal. But everything that heals is not necessarily as good as it was in the first place. So hooves are kind of the same way. Short schedules are important. It's important to just remove millimeters at a time, like we've been doing on this horse, and I think that's part of the reason why his hooves are so healthy. So yeah, pretty much done with this foot and about to pull it forward. Alright, so now I have this hoof forward on the stand. Going to scrape off some of the mud, and you can kind of see between my hands, you can see the different wall heights, how the medial side is a bit longer than the lateral side, but I'm not so worried about that on this horse because the soft tissue in the back of his hoof is level, and that's really the most important part. And his movement dictates this wear pattern, and he's old and he's stiff, and there's not too much we can do about that. So now I've got this horse's left front hoof on the stand. You see, once again, lots of mud, kind of difficult to scrape out and get these hooves clean enough to trim, and that just is what it is with the environment being the way that it is right now. It just comes with the territory, and it's all part of the job. There's no way to escape the mud in northwest Arkansas during the winter, unfortunately. Yeah, just cleaning off his foot a bit more. And one thing with this foot up in the air, I've already noticed is that compared to the other 3 hooves, this one likes to contract in the heel area a little bit more. So probably going to start there and focus on his frog and his bars on his heels the most. And really clean up that frog, make sure there's no disease in there. Make sure there's no fungus. Anything that could rot away what little tissue we already have there. Not that there's not much tissue, but compared to his other 3 hooves, there is less tissue in the frog on this hoof. So I'm going to take those heels down, and then I don't need to nip all the way around the toe on this horse because his toe is actually sitting level or slightly below that toe callus that he has. And toe callus is a good thing. And I actually don't think I meant to rasp through it very much. I think that was kind of an accident. When they have a toe callus like that, sometimes it's hard to get to rasping the toe without brushing over the top of it a little bit. So I actually didn't remove too much of it. Just a few swipes with my rasp. But I maybe removed less than 1/8 of an inch, probably like a 1/16 of an inch, right there at the toe where it looks like the sole is rasped. And I didn't really mean to do that, but sometimes it happens. And thankfully, like, this horse is not sore or anything afterward. But if I was trimming this hoof in the future and was thinking about it, or when it's not as wet and muddy, he doesn't have a toe callus like that. That just appears during these conditions. But I would have preferred not to rasp through it. He wasn't sore, uncomfortable, or anything like that. But if this was a horse I hadn't ever trimmed before and I was working on him for the first time, it would not be super smart to rasp through that structure. So we all make little mistakes, and I feel like that was one of mine. On this hoof, it didn't have any negative consequences, but it's something I would try to avoid doing. And I gave him that detail on the back of the foot to hopefully create a smoother landing for his hoof and help those heels open up a little bit. So now I've got that front hoof forward on the stand, and I'm scraping off any big mud chunks of mud, I guess would be the appropriate way to say it. And then from the top, I don't do as much work on this horse's hooves because, like I said, he's an old man and he gets a little bit uncomfortable having his feet forward on the stand for long periods of time. So I try to do the bulk of my work from the bottom and just smooth everything from the top. Once again, thanks everybody for joining me and for watching the video. And if you have any comments or questions about the trim or anything you've seen in this video, please leave them in the comment section. Thanks again.